Hello everyone, Flared2 friends. I'm very excited because we've reached a new release of Flared2, perhaps the most significant one since its initial launch in November 2024. This release introduces major new features and fixes for several reported bugs. Let's start with the first big update. As you can see, the Flared2 panel now looks quite different from the previous version. We've made a conscious effort to better separate the various types of generators and objects created by Flared2. This makes it easier to copy specific functionalities between multiple flares in a scene. You can now copy individual features using the linking system, which allows you to connect multiple flares. The update ensures that all linked flares can be updated simultaneously with the same settings as the one you're currently editing. Additionally, when copying properties from one flare to another, you'll now find many more categories to choose from. This allows for more precise control over which specific elements of the flare you want to copy. That said, the panel has become quite lengthy to navigate. To help with this, you can now collapse all panels by clicking and dragging with your mouse, reopening only the ones you need. Alternatively, you can expand them all individually if you prefer. For those with a keen eye, you'll notice that the Starburst effect in this version is different from what we had in previous releases. Both the Starburst and Sunbeam effects have undergone significant changes. We've completely reworked the parameters that define these elements. Let's take a closer look at the Starburst. I'll activate the solo function to isolate it. As you can see, whether you're working in cycles or Eevee, the behavior remains consistent. To simplify things, we've also introduced a blurring function. To achieve this blur effect within the shaders, you'll need more render samples, even in Eevee. For example, I currently have 16 samples in the viewport. If I increase it to 256, the blur will become much finer, refining the overall effect. The Starburst Generator comes with several options. The first defines the type of shutter. A linear shutter, while not physically real, is useful for creating linear light effects like the ones you see here. We also have options like 3-blade, 4-blade, 5, and 8 blades. For each of these, you can adjust the scale, size, and the brightness of the effect. Remember, you can push the values beyond the defaults if needed. For instance, if the brightness caps at 4, you can set it to 10 for a more intense light. The default values are safe and shouldn't cause any issues. Next, we have rotation, which allows you to spin the Starburst 360 degrees. You can also adjust the thickness of each ray, controlling whether they appear more spread out or tightly focused. The blur parameter affects the rays, and the offset value determines how far each ray extends from the center. Watch as I adjust these settings, moving the rays away from the center and then bringing them closer. While this might seem like a minor feature, it can create some very interesting effects, as you can see. These adjustments can be particularly useful in specific scenarios to achieve results that would otherwise be impossible. We've also updated all the presets to accommodate these new parameters. As you can see, the new generator has been integrated into every preset. Here's an important note. With this update, the Starburst now operates on a single plane. This addresses a common issue in cycles where additional light paths were needed to handle transparency. We've significantly reduced the number of light paths required for the Starburst, as it now only uses one light path regardless of your settings. This is a major improvement. The same applies to the Sunbeam effect. The rays have been completely rewritten and are now fundamentally different from before. The old generator relied on a multitude of overlapping 3D objects, but the new version uses a single shader. This allows for greater complexity in the Sunbeam effect without creating additional transparent planes, which previously caused performance issues in cycles. The goal here was to consolidate everything into one shader, reducing the need for multiple light paths in renders. We believe this is the right direction for the future, which is why we've rebuilt all the presets with these new features. We hope you find these updates useful. Let us know your thoughts. Your feedback is incredibly important to us. Now, let's move on to another new feature, albeit a smaller one. The lens dirt effect. Previously, when enabling anamorphic mode, the lens dirt effect wasn't affected. Now it stretches anamorphically, aligning perfectly with the overall effect. This was a specific request from a user whose name I can't recall at the moment, and we're thrilled to have implemented it. It works seamlessly in both cycles and Eevee. Next, let's talk about bug fixes, and there are quite a few. One of the key improvements involves simplifying complex scenes and cycles by separating flare rendering from the main scene. This is particularly useful for compositing in external applications. When you enable this option, the compositor renders the flares separately from the scene objects. For example, in this scene, I'll activate the feature, and it will prompt me to automatically set up the nodes in the compositor. If you're not familiar with the compositor, I recommend letting it handle this. Be aware, though, that any existing nodes will be overwritten. The compositor essentially takes two inputs, the base scene, rendered in cycles or Eevee, and a separate scene containing only the flares, rendered in Eevee for speed. These are then combined into the final composite. Let's do a quick render to see how it works. The flare is rendered in Eevee, while the cube is rendered in cycles. The result is a seamless blend, as if everything was rendered in a single pass. This makes it easy to output just the flare layer if needed, which is especially handy for animations or external compositing in software like After Effects. You can also save the layers as separate EXR files for more flexibility. However, we've identified a bug with this feature on macOS. Users have reported stability issues when rendering animations with this mode enabled. After investigating, we traced the problem to a Python function that handles flare activation and deactivation during rendering. As a temporary workaround, we've added a Disable Auto Switch option in the Flared2 preferences. When enabled, you'll need to manually disable flares before rendering animations and re-enable them afterward. It's not ideal, but it resolves the issue for now. We're working on a more user-friendly solution for macOS users. Another bug we've fixed involved ghost flares that would sometimes remain in the scene after deleting lights or flare components. This should no longer happen. Deleting a flare, even partially, will now remove it entirely. We've also addressed an issue with 3D occlusion. In this test scene, we have two flares that appear the same size, even though they are positioned at very different distances in the scene. This might work fine for motion graphics, but if you're working on a realistic image, it's not ideal. While I could manually adjust the size of each flare by scaling them individually, it doesn't make sense to do this manually when working on a computer. Let the software handle it. The first step is to link the two flares so that any adjustments made to one are automatically applied to the other. To do this, simply click on this icon. Next, I'll disable the 2D mode and switch both flares to 3D mode. Now you can see that the closer flare behaves as expected, appearing larger, while the distant flare looks like a small, faint star. This behavior was already present in previous versions of Flared2. Now, let's talk about the global decay factor. If you hover over it with your mouse, you'll see that it determines whether the decay of the flares over distance is natural, as in real life, or artificially enhanced. Setting it to 0 results in natural decay, while setting it to 1 creates a more exaggerated, forced decay. I'll apply this setting to both flares. In older versions of Flared2, there was a bug where, if this value is anything other than 0, moving an object in front of the flares wouldn't make them disappear as they should. Now, as you can see, the flares correctly disappear when occluded. This bug has been fixed by adjusting some nodes involved in the occlusion calculations. I encourage you to test this functionality and let me know if you encounter any issues. If something doesn't work as expected, please report it, and we'll address it promptly. Finally, we've adjusted several shader values, including dirt leak brightness, glow scale, glow brightness, hoop scale, hoop brightness, and halo brightness. These changes may cause discrepancies in scenes created with older versions of Flared2. If you're working on an important project, we recommend sticking with the previous version until you're ready to update. For custom presets, you'll need to reload and resave them with the new parameters to ensure compatibility. This update represents a significant step forward, but it's not without its challenges. We've spent a month refining these features and squashing unexpected bugs. We're proud of the results and hope you find the improvements worthwhile. Your feedback is crucial, so please let us know what you think. Looking ahead, our next focus will be on improving the hoop and halo effects, which have always felt a bit lacking. While they're functional, we believe they can be much better. Thank you all, and happy creating. Cheers.